Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into a world of dust, devotion, and dangerously sharp awls. You're waking up before the sun in an ancient Egyptian monastery, probably 9th century or so. There's no snooze button, no coffee, and definitely no TikTok. Just the flickering glow of olive oil lamps and the rhythmic creak of sandals on stone floors. You stretch out on your thin straw mat, your joints already groaning, because apparently manuscript binding isn't the gentlest line of work. You pull your rough woolen tunic over your head and grope around for your belt pouch. Inside, your precious tools, bone folder, awl, twine, and a waxed linen cloth that smells faintly of goat. You blink blearily as Brother Macarius stomps by with a jug of water, muttering something about demons in the well. Standard Tuesday. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your city and what time it is right now. Let's see who else is up late or early with us. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step out into the monastery courtyard. The sky still dark, but tinged with that pre-dawn indigo. Palm trees sway just slightly. There's a chorus of crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl, and the soft scrape of Brother Shenout opening the chapel doors. You smell ashes and last night's lentils still lingering in the air. Inside the chapel, candles flicker under fading frescoes. You kneel on the cold stone floor for morning prayers, your knees already resenting you. The chanting begins low, humming Coptic hymns, passed down by memory and repetition. Your stomach growls, but you ignore it. Breakfast is after the first work bell, and you've got codices to make. The bells ring eventually, 3 slow, metallic thuds from a rusting bronze bell suspended between 2 worn beams. Time to start the day for real. You shuffle down the hall toward the scriptorium, a narrow room with slits for windows and enough dust to write your name in. Several monks are already inside, squinting over parchment and murmuring verses from the Gospel of Thomas. Brother Theodorus is trimming reed pens again, bits of shavings accumulating around his sandals like oddly fragrant snow. On your bench today is a stack of roughly tanned parchment sheets, uneven and still faintly damp, you sigh. Another shipment of hides not quite cured right. Someone up north is rushing the process again. You give the pile a long, dramatic glare. It doesn't help, but it feels satisfying. Your fingers move automatically now, years of habit guiding them. You separate out the leaves, feeling for warps and ridges. Checking for ink, bleed scars from earlier attempts. You toss one aside that smells too strongly of vinegar. Parchment shouldn't smell like salad. There's a rhythm to all this. Monks shuffle, birds chirp. Brother Zachariah coughs like he's trying to summon the plague. You nod to yourself. The day is underway. Historians still argue whether Coptic monastic scriptoria operated more like silent workshops or informal classrooms. In your experience, it's both. Some days it's dead silent except for the scratching of quills. Other days Brother Pachomius will not stop theorizing about whether angels have thumbs. Today's a quiet one. Thank goodness. Now and then, you glance up at the shelf above your station. Resting there, in layers of dust, are half-finished codices from weeks past. Some you're proud of. Tight bindings, minimal warping, neatly ruled lines. Others not so much. One has a cover warped like a potato chip. Another has a binding so tight it squeaks when opened. You remind yourself that you're working for posterity, and also, that posterity might not be that picky. A small mouse scurries across the floor. You don't react. At this point, it's part of the staff. You named it Titus 2 weeks ago. Titus seems to prefer vellum scraps to papyrus, and you're beginning to think he's got taste. You pause, flex your fingers, and rub your eyes. The sun has now crested over the eastern wall, bathing the scriptorium in a thin line of gold. You can hear the cook shouting at someone in the kitchen garden. It smells faintly of onions and despair. Time to sort your quires, those bundles of folded pages that make up the backbone of a manuscript. But that's for later. For now, you lean back on your bench, inhale the scent of drying ink and sheep hide, and prepare yourself for the long, uneventful, ink-stained hours ahead. It's a sleepy kind of purpose. Tedious, exacting, and endlessly repetitive. But in the quiet rhythm of it all, there's a kind of peace. You shuffle from your bench to the scriptorium's back table, dodging Brother Cyril, who's hunched over a psalter like it's plotting against him. The table's cluttered. Shards of reed pens, scraps of parchment, and a clump of beeswax you hope isn't food. You give the space a half-hearted sweep with your sleeve and set down your materials. The routine begins. Your first task is checking today's quires, those groups of folded sheets that eventually become a codex. You tap each one, feel its thickness, and mumble to yourself about how the third fold always wants to buckle. The parchment today is particularly finicky. One sheet has a translucent spot the size of a fig. You hold it up to the light, squint, then gently pat it like an injured dove. You'll fix it later. The scriptorium hums with quiet repetition. Quills scratch. Paper crinkles. Someone sneezes. You watch Brother Moses meticulously rule lines across a folio with a piece of charcoal and a twine guide. His hand trembles slightly. Too much fasting? Not enough figs. The air smells like ink and sweat and something else. A musky hint of goat hide mixed with the spicy resin, burned during morning incense. Comforting in a medieval allergens kind of way. You reach into your pouch and pull out your reed pen. You sharpen it using a whetstone that's worn so thin it resembles a communion wafer. You test the nib on your thumb, wince slightly, then nod with satisfaction. The pen's ready. You dip it into a shallow inkwell, a mix of soot, gum arabic, and wine vinegar, and scrawl today's quire number on the first page in a loose Coptic script. Your handwriting is decent. Not calligraphy, but passable. The kind of script that says, "This monk is not entirely asleep." The scriptorium's lighting is, generously, terrible. Thin shafts of sunlight slant in through high-slit windows, illuminating motes of dust, and not much else. A nearby candle flickers dangerously close to your elbow. You shift slightly, narrowly avoiding becoming a footnote in the monastic fire logs. A fringe tidbit you've picked up over the years. Some monks chew the ends of their quills for luck. Or out of stress. Or boredom. It's unclear which. You tried it once. Splinters in your tongue. Never again. Across the room, Brother Philotheos sighs dramatically. He's working on an illuminated gospel, and has just smeared gold leaf across his own eyebrow. Again, you watch him try to scrape it off with his thumbnail and quietly thank the saints that you're just binding today, not decorating. Less flair, more chance of keeping your dignity. Historians still argue whether monks specialized in specific tasks, copying, binding, decorating, or rotated roles depending on the season or the abbot's mood. In your case, it's definitely a mix. Yesterday, you were copying out a passage from the Acts of the Apostles. Tomorrow, you might be grinding pigment from malachite or trying not to stab yourself while trimming leather. It's a chaotic little ecosystem, and no one's entirely in charge. You hear the faint clatter of wooden sandals as someone enters the scriptorium with a basket of fresh parchment. The smell hits first, pungent, sour, slightly fishy. You gag just a bit. It's Brother Menace, proudly declaring he's perfected the new tanning process. You're pretty sure it involves urine. You do not ask. You return to your folding. Each quire must be aligned perfectly. Edges straight, folds sharp. You use your trusty bone folder, smoothed from years of use. You run it along the crease, pressing with a steady rhythm. The sound is quiet but satisfying. A soft crackle, like stepping on dry leaves. You hum to yourself, maybe a hymn, maybe something that just sounds like one. Somewhere behind you, someone drops a bundle of parchment and mutters an oath that probably needs confessing. You ignore it. Your own stack is almost done. Your hands moved by memory now fold a line, crease, repeat. Occasionally, you flip a sheet over, and find a faint trace of old writing. Palimpsests, they're called. Scrubbed parchment reused for new texts. A ghost of a Greek poem here. A tax record there. You smile. Even monks recycle. You pause, rub your temples. The light has shifted. Morning is slipping into late morning, and your stomach is considering revolt. A fly buzzes near your ear. You swat it away. It returns. You swat again. A small victory. Your current project is a collection of sayings by the Desert Fathers, ascetic wisdom, recorded line by grumbling scribes who never expected anyone to bind it together. But here you are, stitching together their spiritual agony with linen thread and mild caffeine withdrawal. You glance at your pile, 12 quires, folded and marked, ready for piercing and sewing. But that's for later. Right now, you stretch your arms, pop your knuckles, and lean back to stare at the ceiling. A small lizard clings to the stone arch above you. It blinks lazily. You blink back. There's a quiet dignity to this monotony, a rhythm not unlike breathing. You fold parchment, and the centuries fold around you. And then Brother Theodorus sneezes directly onto your notes. You sigh deeply. Another normal day in the scriptorium. Your hands are already aching by the time you reach the parchments that need sorting. They've been stacked unevenly on a wooden tray, curled at the edges like drying leaves. You stare at them with the same expression one might give a pile of laundry left out in the rain. Nothing for it. You dig in. First, you separate parchment from papyrus. That's easy enough. Parchment is thicker, more temperamental, more prone to puckering when damp. Kind of like Brother Cassian before morning prayers. Papyrus, on the other hand, is lighter, crisper, and smells a bit like stale barley. You're not entirely sure why both are still used. Some say it's tradition. Others blame budget constraints from the bishopric. Historians still argue whether Coptic binders preferred one over the other for specific genres, or simply use whatever they could get their ink stained hands on. You hold a sheet of parchment up to the light. It's goat skin, you think? The hair side is rougher, grainier, and sometimes still bears the faint suggestion of freckles or follicles. The flesh side is smoother, ideal for writing, if you don't mind the occasional oil blotch. You run your fingers along a groove in the surface. Likely stretched too quickly on the frame, you mutter something unrepeatable under your breath. Your next sheet is a nightmare. A long wormy tunnel burrows right through a middle section, likely the work of parchment beetles. Tiny monsters with a taste for theological literature. You sigh, toss it in the repair pile, and reach for the next. This one has a weird purple hue to it. You sniff? Wine spill? Or possibly a prank? You'll ask Brother Abraham later. He has that look about him. Some manuscripts are made purely from papyrus sheets. You handle them with extra care. They tear more easily than parchment, and have an unpleasant habit of curling up like offended scrolls. The reeds that make papyrus are pressed and dried in overlapping strips, then glued together with their own sugars, and sometimes alarmingly, saliva. Fun fact, some scribes chewed the edges before pasting to soften the fibers. You tried that once. Never again. Tasted like swamp. You shift your focus to the binding batch for today, a mix of Gospels and Apocrypha. There's even a funerary text, which means extra care. You don't want to mess up the part that's supposed to guide someone's soul through the afterlife. That kind of typo doesn't just earn you penance. It earns you ghosts. You reach into a linen pouch for a piece of pumice. Each sheet gets a gentle rub down to smooth it further and remove leftover hair or fat. The sound is dry, a soft grating like distant sandpaper. Your fingers grow dusted with powder. You sneeze. Again. The monk beside you hands over a fresh stack and whispers, "Watch out. Top one's greasy." You raise an eyebrow, feel the slickness, and scowl. Someone's been rushing the drying process again. You flip it, and sure enough, tiny old blisters on the surface. If you try writing on this, it'll blot like a spilled ink pot. You sigh and set it aside, mentally composing an angry letter to the tanning monk which you will never send because you live in a monastery and passive, aggressive silence is practically a vow. Quirky tidbit of the day: someone once tried binding palm leaves into a codex format. It did not go well. Turns out, palm leaves aren't particularly page-friendly. Too rigid, too brittle, and likely to explode into leafy chaos if bent the wrong way. You still have one of those palm leaf experiments shoved behind your workbench. It occasionally attracts curious spiders. You inspect each parchment sheet, mentally labeling them: this one's good for a title page, that one's for the middle sections, and this one, oh dear, has a faint bloodstain in the corner. You turn it over, examine it. Probably not human. Hopefully not human. Maybe the result of a cut finger or an overzealous fly swatting. You shrug and decide it adds character. As you work, you occasionally hear low murmurs. Not prayers, but low volume debates. Brother Shenout is arguing with Brother Justice about the best way to store completed manuscripts. Flat or upright. Wrapped or unwrapped. With or without cedar chips. You've tried all of the above. Honestly, the only thing that truly works is praying they don't mold. Your eyes start to blur, so you blink and stretch, glancing toward the far corner of the scriptorium. There, the binding loom sits idle for now, just a wooden frame and a few bent nails. That's where you'll be lacing cords later. But first, parchment. You stop when you reach a sheet with faint blue ruling lines. Unusual. Someone must have used lapis lazuli pigment, a rare indulgence. You touch it gently. It's soft, like powdered chalk, and slightly smudged. You make a note to ask who ruled this one. Might be from the Alexandria order. They love their dramatic pigments. A gust of wind snakes through the window slit, rustling the parchment stack. You clamp your hand down just in time. One sheet escapes, flutters dramatically across the floor, and lands in a puddle of candle wax. Of course, you fish it out, hiss slightly, and wipe it off with a rag that was clean sometime last season. The sun's now creeping higher in the sky. The scriptorium smells like ink, goats, and mild despair. You stretch again, roll your shoulders, and admire your sorted stack. Neatly trimmed, organized by size and quality, ready for folding. Each piece of parchment has passed through your hands, judged like a contestant in a very low-stakes pageant. You mutter a short prayer, not for divine inspiration but for a lunch break. Your fingers are stiff, your eyes twitchy, and your sense of time entirely broken. Still, the work goes on. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a small, sleepy voice says, "You know you love this." You reach for your bone folder, your old, trusty companion, and roll it between your fingers like a monk flipping prayer beads. Its edges are worn smooth, warm from your touch. Today's quires must be folded with precision. A slip now, and the whole codex will sit lopsided on the bishop's shelf, mocking your craftsmanship for decades. The pile of sorted parchment waits like a row of expectant faces. You pick the top sheet, align the edges with the care of a baker folding dough, and draw the bone folder across the center. The crease is crisp, tight, and oddly satisfying. You nod slightly to yourself. This is the part of the day when you feel like an artist, if the canvas smelled vaguely of goat and required a lot more squinting. One by one, the sheets get folded into bifolia. 2-page spreads that will stack into quires. Sometimes 4 sheets to a quire, sometimes 5, depending on the text and whether the abbot's feeling generous with parchment allowances. You mutter counting rhymes under your breath. 1 for the martyr, 2 for the creed, 3 for St. Anthony's celery seed. It doesn't make sense, but it helps. Brother Theodorus wanders past, glancing at your growing stack of folded quires, still creasing by hand. He smirks. Should have borrowed the roller press from Alexandria. You smile thinly. The last time he tried using that thing, he cracked a wooden board and flattened 2 pages into something resembling pastry. He hasn't been allowed near it since. Today's quires are mostly uniform, though one corner keeps curling up no matter how much you flatten it. You frown, apply a bit of beeswax, and press again. It works. Mostly. A fly lands squarely in the crease, just as you fold it, smearing itself into a Rorschach blot that future historians might interpret as divine symbolism. You peel it off with a sigh and mark the page with a bit of red thread. Repair later. Historians still argue whether Coptic codices had fixed quire numbers or if they varied based on the scribe's personal preferences and available materials. You suspect it was a combination of divine inspiration and practical exhaustion. Sometimes you just ran out of parchment and called it done. This gospel ends here, amen. Don't ask questions. You glance down and notice your fingers are starting to smudge the edges. Ink stains, oil from your skin, maybe a crumb or two from this morning's flatbread. You wipe your hands on your tunic. No point pretending cleanliness now. And keep going. Midway through the stack, a strange quire catches your eye. The parchment feels different, softer, darker, and slightly aromatic. You sniff. It's dyed. Not the usual off-white, but a faint, dusty rose. Maybe for a liturgical text. Or someone got ambitious with madder root dye. You don't remember seeing this one before. You flip through the sheets. On the inner folio, faint Greek letters shimmer. Under the surface, a palimpsest. Someone scraped off an old theological treatise and reused it. You hold it up to the light and squint. It might be a hymn, or an invoice. Hard to tell. Quirky tidbit. Sometimes monks wrote shopping lists in the margins. Olive oil, wax, fig cakes. One ancient manuscript in the library has a doodle of a rather robust chicken next to the word urgent. You finish the dyed quire and move on to the last batch. These are a bit warped. Probably dried too fast or left too long in the sun. You try to press them flat, but they fight back like tiny sails. You stack them under a heavier book, muttering prayers for divine compliance. The room is quieter now. The morning bustle has faded into focused stillness. The only sounds are the occasional clink of tools, a low murmur from a scribe reciting aloud, and the ever-present flap of sandals on stone. You glance at the light from the window slit. It's sharper now, the sun rising fast. Not long before the midday bell, you review your work. 12 neatly folded quires, stacked in order, interleaved with slips of scrap to prevent bleed-through. You run your finger along the spines, feeling the ridged folds, the subtle bumps where two hides overlap. It's almost beautiful, and then you notice it. One quire is upside down. You stare at it. The top edge is clearly where the fold should be. You flip it. Nope, now the text is inverted. You groan inwardly. Somehow, in a moment of distraction, probably during the chicken doodle flashback, you folded it wrong. You gently unfold it, smooth it again, and correct the crease. Crisis averted, sort of. The paper remembers. It always remembers. By now, your back is protesting, your eyes are watering, and the scent of something suspiciously burnt is drifting in from the kitchen. Brother Menace probably tried roasting barley again. You shake your head. The final step in this folding ritual is stacking the quires in order and punching a small hole in the upper left corner of each. The quire signature mark. You use a tiny brass stylus and mark each with a dot or short line. It's simple, efficient, and saves hours of confusion later. One time, you forgot. You ended up binding the Gospel of Luke in reverse. The bishop was not amused. You scoop up the quires, nestle them in a worn leather pouch, and brush the remaining parchment dust off your tunic. Your hands ache, your knees crack as you stand, and there's a definite crick in your neck. Still, you smile. The quires are ready. Soon they'll be pierced, sewn, and laced into something solid. Something that might, just might, last 1,000 years. And maybe, if you're lucky, someone in the future will flip through your binding and say, "Hey, this one knew what they were doing." You gather your prepared quires in a tidy stack, their crisp folds and faintly earthy smell. Oddly comforting. Time for the next act in the binder's slow ballet, piercing holes with the awl. You glance toward the tool rack, but of course your favorite awl isn't there. You mutter something that may or may not qualify as a sin, and check under your bench. There it is, nestled beside a curled up fig leaf someone probably used as a bookmark last Lent. Your awl is simple. Wooden handle, curved iron point, dulled from years of use, but still sharp enough to ruin your day if you sneeze at the wrong moment. You test it against your palm, not hard enough to draw blood, but enough to remind you who's boss. You pick up the first quire, hold it steady, and begin the slow, deliberate act of piercing. Each quire gets a line of holes along its spine fold, 3 to 5, depending on the size. You use a template carved into a strip of olive wood, aligning it carefully. Tap, twist, tap, twist. The awl sinks in with a soft crunch. The smell of broken parchment fibers rises, warm and oddly nutty. You like that smell? It means progress. Tap, twist, tap, twist. You're halfway through the second quire when a gnat flies directly into your left nostril. You jerk back, sneeze violently, and jab the awl through the wrong spot. You glare at the page. That'll be a repair stitch later. You mark it with a piece of red thread and swear vengeance on all flying things. Historians still argue whether binders in Coptic monasteries followed precise geometric templates or just winged it based on experience. You're squarely in the eyeball and pray school. After years of binding, your hands know the rhythm, the angles, the resistance of each parchment type. You know when the awl meets a fat glob of hide glue by the squelch. You know when a fold's been reused from a failed manuscript by the slightly off center hole pattern. You keep going. The third quire has a stubborn hide section that bends your awl tip slightly. You curse in Coptic under your breath. Nothing too scandalous, just enough to feel better. You switch to your backup awl, which has a finer point but a slippery grip. You'll have to be careful. Brother Justice walks by, munching loudly on something suspiciously crunchy. He peers at your work. That one looks crooked, he says, gesturing toward the quire you just finished. You stare at him. He shrugs and walks off. You resist the urge to throw the awl at his head. Instead, you double, check the quire. It's fine. Mostly. Maybe a hair off center, but you'll fix it in sewing. You work through the stack. Occasionally, a quire resists. Some folds are thicker. Some parchment sheets overlap weirdly. You adjust, tilt the awl, sometimes mutter a small prayer to Saint Catherine, patroness of library things. You're not sure she covers all injuries, but it feels appropriate. A quirky bit of monastic trivia: one of the old masters used to chant hymns while piercing quires, claiming it kept the holes aligned with divine harmony. You tried it once. Your holes ended up in a zigzag pattern that looked more like musical notation than a binding template. You pause to flex your fingers. The awl work is deceptively tiring. Tiny movements, repeated dozens of times, each requiring just enough pressure to pierce but not tear. You massage your wrists, glance out the window slit. The light is harsh now. Midday is close. Your shadow falls across the stack like a crooked bookmark. On the fifth quire, you strike something hard. Bone. A calcified bit of skin. You lean closer. There's a white fleck embedded in the parchment, smooth and circular. You touch it with your thumb. Definitely bone, likely a flaw from tanning. You pierce around it gently, spacing the holes a little wider to compensate. You whisper, "Sorry," to whoever's goat this once was. As you reach the final quire, your hand starts to tremble from fatigue. You rest the awl for a moment, breathing in the scent of wax and hide and sweat. Then you press forward, final piercings. Tap, twist, and done. You stack the quires again, admiring the neat row of pinholes along each spine. The pattern pleases you. Symmetry is rare in this world, and here you've created a tiny sliver of it. You wrap the stack in a linen cloth, ready for sewing. And then you notice the blood. It's a small drop, barely visible, blooming red on the edge of a sheet. You hold up your left index finger. A fresh prick, right where the awl's edge kissed your skin without warning. You press it with your thumb, grab a scrap of papyrus, and blot the page. It's minor, nothing worth confessing. Unless Brother Theodorus sees it, and decides you've desecrated the sacred sayings of Abapomen with your heathen DNA. You rub a bit of wax on the spot to seal it. Done. No one will ever notice, unless, of course, a future archaeologist carbon dates it and declares this was the blood of a forgotten martyr. Stranger things have happened. You lean back on your bench, eyes sore, back stiff, hands nicked and stained. But the quires are pierced. The spine holes are ready. The codex is starting to take form. And somewhere across the room, Brother Shinout sneezes so hard he drops a bottle of ink. You flinch, instinctively covering your own materials. The ink misses you, but not by much. One more reason to keep your stack wrapped. That and the flies. Always the flies. You set aside the awl, finally, and stretch your fingers as if you've just survived a thumb war with destiny. They crack like old wood. The linen pouch of cords sits beside you, a tangled mess of palm fiber and linen thread dyed with a dull saffron wash. Today's task: threading needles and preparing the sewing cords. It's not glamorous work. But then again, neither is anything in this entire monastery, except maybe when the bishop visits and someone lights both ends of a candle. You unwind a length of palm fiber cord, thick and dry, with a subtle dusty scent like an abandoned prayer book. You rub it between your palms to soften it. Palm cord is strong enough to last through centuries of handling, flipping, and accidental dunkings in incense water. You loop it carefully through your fingers and cut it to length using a small blade that's technically meant for trimming leather. It's not exactly sharp anymore, but with a little extra elbow grease, it still manages. Next up, threading the linen needles. This is where the real frustration lies. The eye of the needle is barely big enough, and the end of the thread always seems to fray at just the wrong moment. You lick the tip. You try again. You mutter something unflattering about St. Jerome, who probably never threaded a needle in his life. Finally, success. 1 down. 3 more to go. Brother Theodorus strolls by, whistling tunelessly and carrying a jar of lampblack ink. You watch as he stubs his toe on a bench and nearly launches the jar across the scriptorium. It lands with a loud clunk. You both freeze. No spill. No stain. Miracles do exist. You return to your threading with renewed caution. Historians still argue whether Coptic bookbinders used metal or bone needles, and whether the thread was waxed beforehand or just rubbed through a cloth soaked in olive oil. You've used both. Today, you choose wax, a tiny lump kept in your belt pouch, smelling faintly of rosemary. You drag the thread through it slowly, watching it stiffen just enough to behave. Waxed thread runs smoother, tangles less, and, most importantly, impresses visiting abbots with its golden sheen under candlelight. You loop the threads into a sewing frame, not fancy, just 2 wooden uprights and a crossbar strung with palm cords. You space the cords evenly, notching them into the wood base with tiny, shallow grooves. Each cord will anchor a quire, the spine sewn tightly around it like ribs laced through a corset. You smile at the analogy. Not exactly monastic thinking, but hey, no one else is in your head. You retrieve your pierced quires and line them up. Each spine faces the cords. Each needle is loaded. You sit down with a sigh, adjust the stool, and begin the slow, rhythmic task of sewing. Loop through the first hole. Pass around the cord. Pull tight, move to the next. The movement is meditative, almost soothing, until your thread catches on a splinter. You hiss, pull it back gently, and smooth the wood with your sleeve. Problem solved. For now, there's a satisfying tension as the quires begin to stack. They form a block, rising like a stepped ziggurat of goat hide and holy text. Brother Pachomius passes by and pauses, watching. You missed a loop, he says flatly, pointing at the third quire. You don't even look. No, I didn't, you reply. He squints. You squint. You were right. Barely, he grunts and moves on. Small victories. A cat, unofficial scriptorium mascot, jumps up onto your table and curls into your thread basket like it owns the place. You gently nudge it aside. It stretches, yawns, and resumes napping on the rejected parchment pile. You give up. It's not like you need that stack today anyway. As you move through the quires, your back begins to tighten. You shift position, hunching lower, threading with mechanical precision. The sound of the thread pulling through parchment is soft and papery, like brushing dry grass. Occasionally, it squeaks as it rubs against the wax. The cords tighten. The spine begins to firm up. Quirky tidbit time. One ancient Coptic codex you once saw had a strand of human hair caught in the sewing. Possibly an accident. Possibly a monk's quiet protest against years of poor meals and bad lighting. You briefly consider leaving one of your own hairs in today's binding. A secret ancient signature. Tempting. The final quire goes on with minimal drama. The needles pass smoothly. The cords pull tight. You knot the thread at the base, trim the ends, and run a last pass of wax over the seams. You set the newly sewn text block aside with a satisfying thunk. It's firm, flat, and just flexible enough. You stretch. Your knees crack. You look at your fingers, stained with ink, wax, a tiny dot of blood, and what might be a smudge of lentil paste from breakfast. You lick your thumb, rub off the worst of it, and admire the codex. This part of the process is your favorite. The quires are no longer just pieces. They're a single body now, joined spine to spine like vertebrae. It's solid. It's real. It's something you made. And then the cat sneezes directly onto it. You glare. It blinks slowly, clearly unrepentant. You grab a cloth, wipe the spot gently, and mutter something about divine patience. Still, even with cat sneezes, crooked cords, and 4 stubbed fingers, you feel good about this one. Tomorrow, you'll add the boards and the leather. Tonight, you'll probably dream about knots. The sun has shifted again, now slanting through the scriptorium like a judgmental beam of divine disapproval aimed directly at your posture. You grunt, shift your weight, and retrieve the finished text block. The freshly sewn bundle of quires that, up to this point, resembles nothing more than a fancy stack of paper with delusions of grandeur. But not for long. Now comes the real transformation. Turning your stitched stack into a book, you reach for the wooden board stored beneath your bench. You've got options: fig, cedar, olive. Fig is soft and tends to warp. Olive is beautiful, but the grain can be unpredictable. Cedar, though. Cedar is the reliable friend. It resists insects, smells faintly holy, and makes your fingers tingle with potential. You select 2 cedar panels, already sanded flat by Brother Sabas, and left to dry for weeks in the sun. The boards are cut just slightly larger than the text block. Standard practice. You check their edges. One has a nick in the corner, but it's nothing a little wax, and grumbling won't fix. You pull out your drill, a primitive hand, cranked thing that looks more like an instrument of torture than a woodworking tool, and begin the slow process of boring holes for the chords. You hum quietly to yourself, something off, key and vaguely funereal. Each twist of the drill sends a thin spiral of wood, shavings fluttering down to the floor. Once the holes are ready, you loop the sewing cords through them, then back around the spine. You pull each one tight, tying them with small, square knots that will hold the boards in place for 100, maybe even 1,000 years, assuming the cat doesn't eat through one. You test the fit, flex the hinge, it creaks but holds. You smile. Historians still argue whether Coptic bookbinders always used flat boards, or if some early codices had domed or beveled covers. You've seen both. The flatter ones stack better. The fancier ones impress visitors. You suspect it came down to whose turn it was to plane the wood that week. Next up, leather. You dig into the sack at your feet and pull out a folded sheet of camel leather. It's stiff, sun-browned, and smells like regret. You groan. This must be from last year's batch. The one that was tanned too fast and left out during the plague of frogs. It's dry and slightly cracked around the edges, but still usable. Probably. You lay the leather flat, measure the book's dimensions, and mark it with a stylus. A little extra room on the edges, enough to fold over and tuck. You slice it with your curved blade, the edge of which desperately needs sharpening. The cut isn't clean, but it'll do. To soften the hide, you warm it over a candle. Carefully, evenly muttering apologies every time it starts to curl. You rub oil into the rougher patches, massage it like an aching shoulder. Slowly, the stiffness fades. It begins to behave. You smear a thin line of glue, made from boiled fish bones and hide scrapings, along the inside edge of the boards, then press the leather down, smoothing it with your palm. It sticks. You press again for luck, and then comes the wrapping. Folding the leather around the spine is like dressing a very stubborn child. It resists, wrinkles, bubbles. You coax it into place, smoothing, pressing, occasionally swearing through clenched teeth. You tuck the corners, slice small notches to help them fold better, and rub in more wax to seal the seams. Brother Zachariah wanders past, peeks over your shoulder, and says, "That one looks like a camel sat on it." You glance at the cover. He's not wrong. You smooth it again, harder this time, and mutter something about how he can bind the next one if he's so clever. Quirky tidbit: one legendary Coptic manuscript was wrapped in leather made from an unusually hairy goat. The hair was left on for spiritual texture. Pilgrims thought it was miraculous. Scholars thought it was mold. You finish wrapping the spine and press the whole book under a weight. An old sandstone slab engraved with the name of a long dead bishop. Probably not the use he intended, but he's been dead long enough not to complain. While it presses, you check the lacing. One of the knots is a little loose. You tighten it. Another is frayed. You dab it with wax and hope for the best. This part is always nerve-wracking. If something slips now, you'll spend the evening unpicking hours of work. You add 2 small straps made from thin leather thongs. Nothing fancy, just enough to tie the book shut. Some of the more ambitious monks use metal clasps, but last time you tried, you bent the entire corner of the board and nearly branded yourself with a soldering iron. As the glue dries and the leather sets, you lean back and exhale. The codex is no longer just a pile of pages. It's a solid, heavy, wrapped thing. A book, and then the cat, still napping nearby, lets out a long, satisfied purr and stretches, knocking your ink bottle off the shelf with a single outstretched paw. It misses the book. Barely. You glare. The cat yawns. You return to your seat and rest your hand on the leather cover. It's warm from the sun and the pressure of your work. Imperfect, a little warped, faintly lopsided. But it's real. Tomorrow, maybe you'll decorate it. Maybe. But tonight, it lives. You crack your knuckles, which sound like snapping twigs, and take a good long look at your freshly wrapped codex. The boards are firm, the leather taut, the lace is snug. It smells like wax, cedar, and mild frustration, a sure sign of success. Now comes the part you both dread and secretly enjoy: decoration. Or maybe not. This particular codex isn't for the bishop, or even for the liturgical library. It's a backup copy of sayings attributed to an obscure desert hermit whose greatest claim to fame was once yelling at a rock for looking too smug. So you remind yourself, no gold leaf, no elaborate tooling, no need to weep gently into your own beard from the effort of precision. Just a few flourishes to keep the next monk from tossing it out by mistake. Still, you retrieve your stamping kit, a simple wooden box with metal tools for pressing patterns into damp leather. You've got crosses, circles, fish symbols, even a stylized peacock if you're feeling cheeky. You select the plain cross, a safe bet, and test it against a scrap of leather. The design sinks in cleanly, satisfying. You heat the end gently over a candle until it's warm, not hot, then press it into the center of the cover. It leaves a faintly smoky scent and a clean mark. You sit back and admire it. Plain. Reverent. Definitely not going to make the bishop gasp in delight, but that's okay. Some books are meant to whisper, not sing. Historians still argue whether decoration was reserved only for public-facing texts or if even the humblest manuscripts received some aesthetic attention. You've seen both. One psalter had gold leaf on every page, another had nothing but a doodle of a frog. and a rather profane and margin note in Sahidic dialect. You consider adding border tooling. Then you remember your last attempt, which ended in a wobbly mess that looked like a snake had sketched a city map. You wisely move on. Instead, you grab your stylus and scratch a small inscription on the inside of the backboard, bound in the year of our Lord by the hand of the least competent servant of God, Ephraim. It's a joke, mostly. You're not actually named Ephraim, but it's become your go-to pseudonym for bindings you're not sure about. Let future scribes puzzle over that one. You do allow yourself one indulgence. A decorative knot at the base of the leather strap. It's unnecessary, slightly ridiculous, and possibly derived from something you saw on a donkey harness, but it brings you joy. That counts. As you work, Brother Macarius ambles over, balancing a tray of ink pots and raisins. He glances at your cover. No title. He asks through a mouthful of raisins. It's a backup copy. You reply, "If someone reads it, we've already failed." He chuckles, then promptly drops 3 raisins onto your bench. One rolls under your stool. You leave it there. The cat will handle it. Quirky tidbit: one ancient manuscript in the scriptorium has a cover decorated entirely with thumbprints. Apparently, the monk in charge had dipped his hands in ink by accident, then embraced chaos. It's now considered a rare example of intentional randomness, which is generous. You retrieve a bit of colored thread and sew a tiny loop into the spine's leather, an anchor point for a bookmark that may or may not ever be used. You thread a faded red ribbon through it, frayed at the edges and salvaged from an old binding that was half eaten by mice. It dangles just long enough to peek out when the book is shelved. Practical and just a touch poetic. The leather is still slightly damp, but workable. You wrap the codex in a linen cloth and set it in the sun to dry for an hour. The warmth will help tighten everything, like a gentle, radiant hug. As you wait, you clean your tools. The awl goes back in its slot. The stylus is wiped and oiled. The thread is wound. Your bench, which began the day resembling a crime scene, now looks almost respectable. You even find the other half of that fig you started this morning. You do not eat it. You've learned. The sun climbs higher. The air outside is buzzing with heat and low, level B anxiety. Inside, the scriptorium has slipped into its late afternoon lull. The scribes are quieter, the cats sleepier, and the ink stains more pronounced. You unwrap the codex. The leather has darkened slightly, smoothed at the corners. It feels cool in your hands, despite the heat, like it remembers the effort. You open it slowly. The pages shift as one, pliable but firm. You press along the spine. It bends. Just enough. It's finished. Not a masterpiece. Not a relic. But solid, sound, and ready to be shelved, misplaced, rediscovered, forgotten, and perhaps, just perhaps, found again 1,000 years from now by someone wearing gloves and whispering to a museum intern. You add a small label inside the front cover. Just the title, written in your neatest, most unobtrusive script sayings of Abba Isidore, the Elder. Nothing flashy, but at least this time, you spelled Isidore correctly on the first try. You sit back. You wipe your brow. And, against your better judgment, you give the cover one last polish with your sleeve. It shines, just a little. You stare at the codex, now warm from the sun and wrapped in its snug camel leather coat, and think maybe you should decorate it. Just a bit. Nothing extravagant. Nothing that screams, I had free time and a flair for drama. Just something simple, tasteful. The sort of touch that says, yes, this was made by a man who once sewed a manuscript with a chicken feather by accident. But he has standards. You open your kit of metal stamping tools again, roll your shoulders, and set your eyes on the tool you almost never use, the peacock stamp. It's ornate, vaguely lopsided, and prone to slipping if you apply too much pressure. But today, you're feeling bold. You lightly dampen the leather with a cloth, set the tool in the upper, right corner of the front board, and press. There's a soft shaft as the leather accepts the shape. You lift it. The peacock appears, Slightly squinting, maybe a little plump, but proud. You nod satisfied. Then you remember this codex is for the storage shelf, not for public reading, not for the bishop's podium, not even for the chapel. This is the kind of manuscript that gets used once a year, if that. Decorated covers are unnecessary. You stare at the peacock. It stares back, smug and embossed. Well, you mutter, you're already here. You balance things out with a simple border. Nothing more than a few lines etched with the corner of your bone folder. One close to the edge, one just inside that. It frames the leather nicely, adds a bit of geometry to the otherwise plain surface. You almost convince yourself it was intentional from the start. Historians still argue whether such casual decoration practices were deliberate statements of humility or just the result of too many half-trained binders doing their best. You suspect the truth is, as usual, somewhere between blessed simplicity and oops. I sneezed while stamping. You wrap the finished book in a cloth again and place it atop the shelf behind your bench. Safe, secure, away from flying ink bottles and snack hunting cats. It will stay there until someone decides it's time to shelve it downstairs, but your hands aren't done fidgeting yet. You look down at the scrap pile. Off, cuts of leather, misfolded parchment, a page torn in half by accident, yours, not the cat's. On a whim, you grab a piece of scrap leather, cut it into a small square, and begin stamping it with every tool in your kit. Cross, fish, bird, loopy spiral, stylized sun. A sampler of sorts. No purpose, just practice. And maybe, somewhere deep down, a desperate act of creative expression in a life dominated by straight lines and precise stitches. Brother Abraham passes by and eyes your stamping frenzy. Art therapy again? He says dryly. You grunt. He tosses you a fig. Good aim. You mutter, catching it in your lap. Quirky fact of the day, one manuscript cover in the older storage room has a full map of Alexandria embossed on it. No one knows who made it or why, but some suspect the binder got bored and started recreating the streets from memory. It's wildly inaccurate and features a market labeled Fish and Scrolls. You briefly consider adding your name to the cover. Some scribes do it, just initials, usually hidden under the leather flap or etched inside the backboard. You think about it, then decide against it. The work should speak for itself. And also, if something goes wrong, if it molds, or the leather peels, or a future monk uses it to prop up a wobbly altar table, you'd rather not be remembered for that. You clean your tools again, slower this time. The day's nearly done. The scriptorium is emptying. Only a few scribes remain, muttering quietly, eyes red, rimmed, and blinking against the fading light. You look over at your finished codex. Even with the peacock, it looks dignified. It won't change the world, but it'll preserve a sliver of it. A monk's voice, bound in hide and thread, waiting for someone else to listen. And then, without any warning, the candle near your bench gutters and sputters out. The flame coughs once, wheezes, and dies. Smoke curls upward, faint and lazy. You sigh. You weren't finished with your scrap experiments, but maybe it's a sign. Time to wrap it up. You tuck the scraps into your pouch, perhaps for patching another day, and carry the finished codex to the front table where completed works await their trip to the storage cellar. You place it gently beside a manuscript on demonology that's missing half its cover and smells faintly of burned dates. A fitting shelf mate. As you step back, you catch a glimpse of the peacock again now and shadow you squint. Still smug. Still perfect. You shuffle out of the scriptorium, your hands still sticky with wax, and your mind swirling with images of smug leather peacocks and thread that somehow ties itself in knots, even when untouched. The midday bell has long since rung, and now it's time for the part of the day that many monks pretend is for reflection and digestion, but is really just for gossip under the fig tree. You cross the stone courtyard, stepping around a newly washed robe flung across the ground like a theological warning flag. The scent of lentils wafts from the kitchen again. Always lentils. Sometimes with leeks, occasionally with barley, but always lentils. Today's batch smells particularly earthy, which either means the cook is trying out a new spice or accidentally dropped in a small garden. You find Brother Pachomius under the shade of the monastery's oldest fig tree, already seated on a sun-bleached bench. He's spooning lentil mush from a clay bowl and gesturing animatedly with a crust of flatbread. And I said, "If the scroll's that sacred, maybe don't store it next to the pickled fish barrel." You sit beside him with a sigh, your own bowl of lentils cooling in your lap. Ink prices are up again. He grumbles between bites. 4 denarii a vial, if you want anything blacker than dishwater. And don't even ask about cinnabar. That stuff's gone the way of St. Mark's original sandal. You nod sagely, as if this economic crisis affects you deeply. In truth, you've been reusing ink from the bottom of dried out pots for weeks now. A bit of vinegar, a pinch of soot, stir with a stick, and voil. Coptic discount ink. Tastes terrible, writes fine. The conversation turns, as it inevitably does, to manuscript drama. Brother Theodorus accidentally copied a passage from the Gospel of Judas into a hymnal last week. Didn't notice until the second stanza started questioning divine hierarchy. The abbot had a full-blown theological crisis over breakfast. Brother Justus found a scroll in the cellar, written entirely in Nubian. He's been trying to decipher it using the Psalms. So far he's concluded it might be a recipe for goat stew, or a curse against figs. Either way, you steer clear when he's reading aloud. A soft breeze rustles the leaves above. Figs drop at random, occasionally bonking unsuspecting monks on the head. You once saw a one-hit brother shen out so perfectly on the crown that he stood up and declared it divine punishment. He now refuses to sit under the tree, even when it's raining. Quirky tidbit, the monastery cat once dragged a half-bound codex into the kitchen and tried to bury it in the ash pit. It was later retrieved and now sits, slightly sinned, in the scriptorium's questionable theology pile. You eat slowly, mostly to avoid the post-lunch task of hauling completed books to the storage cellar. The fig tree is warm, the bench just uncomfortable enough to prevent full relaxation, and Brother Pachomius is now theorizing that lizard droppings might be an untapped source of ink pigment. You nod along, partly amused, partly horrified. He once boiled acacia bark and called it divine brown. The pages still haven't dried properly. Eventually, the food's gone, the sun has climbed high, and you can delay no longer. You pat your knees, stretch with a theatrical groan, and gather your satchel. Time to face the cellar. As you stand, Brother Abraham passes by holding a tray with 3 empty ink pots and what looks like a withered pear. "Don't go down there without a candle," he warns. "Last time, I nearly tripped over a scroll from the 4th century. Felt like it was trying to bite me." You thank him, grab a stub of beeswax candle from the chapel, and light it with the flickering lamp near the cloister door. The flame dances lazily, casting long, soft shadows. With the codex under one arm and the candle in the other, you descend into the cool darkness of the manuscript cellar. But that's for later. For now, you pause beneath the fig tree, taking one last deep breath of fresh air. The scent of parchment dust, hot stones, and something faintly resinous from the chapel incense mingle around you. You glance over at the monks, still gathered, their laughter echoing softly through the courtyard. Someone makes a joke about a scribe who once copied the word Amen 10 times in a row. Spiritual echo, Brother Justice claims. Or just a sneeze mid-copy. Someone else mutters, you smile. In a world ruled by slow ink, dry Gotskin, and the tyranny of perfect lines, a little lunchtime irreverence is its own kind of salvation. You head toward the steps, candle flickering, codex underarm, back to the dark. The stone steps down to the cellar are smooth and worn, indented in the middle where centuries of sandaled feet have shaped their mark. You descend slowly, the candle throwing gentle, jittery light ahead of you. Cobwebs dangle from the low ceiling like indecisive streamers. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you remember that Brother Zachariah claimed he once saw a bat down here, the size of a small loaf of bread. You hope it was a joke. The storage cellar is quiet, too quiet. You murmur a greeting to the saints whose names line the walls, scratched in charcoal, etched into wood, or mumbled under the breath of monks who really just don't want to trip in the dark. You set the codex gently on a nearby table and light the main wall lamp with your candle. The cellar slowly glows to life, revealing rows of rough wooden shelves, heavy with the weight of bound texts, scrolls, wax tablets, and at least 3 things that look suspiciously like rocks wearing bindings. You never did get an explanation for those. Your job now is to prep this new manuscript for long-term storage. That means labeling it, dusting its future shelf, and saying a small prayer that a scorpion isn't currently living inside the next volume over. You pull out a scrap of parchment and write the manuscript's title, author, if you can call, attributed to Abba Isidore, an author, and binding date. You affix it to a small wooden tag, loop it with thread, and tuck it gently around the spine. Next comes inspection. You lift the codex, check the corners. Still solid. The peacock stamp looks, somehow, even more smug in the dim light. You wipe a small speck of something. Fig jam. Ink. Time will never tell. From the edge and move to the shelving wall. You locate the proper shelf, 4th row down, 2nd alcove. Between a Coptic grammar with half its spine eaten, and a badly translated copy of the Apocalypse of Peter. You slide your codex into place with a sigh, like tucking a child into bed, who will not stir for another 100 years. Historians still argue whether these storage practices were designed with long-term preservation in mind, or were simply a byproduct of not having anywhere else to put things. You're fairly certain it's the latter. The idea of archival protocols in this monastery basically amounts to put it somewhere dry and hope. As you turn to leave, something catches your eye. A manuscript on the bottom shelf has slipped forward, its cover hanging open like a jaw. Curious, you crouch and retrieve it. The leather's brittle, the stitching frayed. You recognize the hand that did the binding. Yours, from 5 winters ago. Inside the margin of one folio is a faint doodle. A tiny monk, arms flailing, being chased by a rather enthusiastic goose. You stifle a laugh. You'd forgotten about that. Brother Theodorus had been mercilessly harassed by a goose during Lent that year, and you memorialized it in ink. You close the book and return it carefully. These are the moments that live in the folds of history, the human scraps between the lines of scripture and sermons. You pick up your candle again and continue down the corridor to the touch-up table. Here, damaged books come for small repairs. Sewing loose quires, patching torn pages, blotting accidental heresies. You reach for your repair tools, but the table is a mess. A tangled web of thread, scraps, and half-used wax cakes. You mutter something about Brother Moses and begin clearing space. The first repair is minor. Just a wormhole straight through a passage of Isaiah. You paste a sliver of scrap parchment over it and re-ink the missing letter. Problem solved. Unless someone believes the missing word was intentional. There was a whole incident last year when a damaged psalm suggested David wanted to pet his enemies. Quirky tidbit: one monk once used lizard skin to patch a manuscript, claimed it was more resilient. It was also shiny and made the page smell like sun-baked rocks. The manuscript is still here, hidden behind the psalters, where no one will accidentally raid it and sneeze. Your second repair is trickier. An ink smudge has blurred half a line of text. You can barely make out the original words. You make an educated guess and copy them back in, though part of you wonders if the original scribe would have appreciated the edit. There's always that underlying question: is this fixing or rewriting? Historians debate it. You mostly hope no one notices. You flip another page and freeze. There, in the margin, is a tiny drawing of what appears to be a saint, doing cartwheels. You lean closer, yes. Definitely a cartwheel. Arms out, hollow tilted. Sandals mid-flip. You blink, smile slowly, and whisper, "Blessed are the acrobats." You close the book gently. Your candle's flickering low now, sputtering every few seconds like it's considering retirement. You snuff it, gather your tools, and head back toward the stairs. The cellar fading behind you like a dream you'll almost remember. The codex is shelved. The repairs are done. The cartwheeling St. Lev's on. You emerge from the cellar blinking like a mole, rubbing candle soot from your fingertips and mentally cataloging which manuscripts you still need to patch this week. It's always more than you think. Always. The scriptorium is mostly quiet now. Late afternoon light cuts across the floor in thin golden stripes, and the temperature has taken on that special kind of heat where parchment begins to warp if you so much as look at it wrong. You sigh, check your ink, stained sleeves, and decide to finish up with a few small touch-ups before Vespers. Back at your bench, you unfurl a damaged folio rescued earlier from a box labeled, helpfully. The page is torn diagonally from the margin inward, as though someone tried to use it as a napkin during a particularly greasy fig feast. You flatten it, place a weight at the corner, and begin mixing your repair paste. Fish glue and aged flour, with just enough vinegar to make your eyes water slightly. You dab it along the tier's edge and press a sliver of nearly matching parchment over the gap. It holds. For now, you flip through another volume that's been flagged for content correction. This usually means heresy, or more often, a scribe's marginal doodle that's either wildly inappropriate or just wildly confusing. You find the page in question, a passage from the Gospel of Matthew where, inexplicably, the scribe has drawn a tiny man rowing a boat across the Sea of Galilee, except the boat is a fish, and the fish appears to be vomiting communion wafers. You pause. You stare. You close the book gently and decide this one can wait until after dinner. Historians still argue whether these marginalia were spiritual metaphors or just evidence that monks got really, really bored. You're leaning toward the boredom theory. You've drawn a few saints with suspiciously modern sandals yourself when no one's looking. You take a clean choir from the pile, brand new, untouched, and probably too pure for the likes of this scriptorium, and begin ruling lines on the pages. You stretch a piece of twine taut across the parchment, darken it with lampblack dust, and snap it against the sheet. Crisp, perfect lines appear like magic. Well, dusty, sneeze-inducing magic. You rule half a dozen sheets this way before your thumb cramps. You flex it with a grimace. It now has the distinct texture of an overused candle stub, and that's when you hear it, low chanting from the chapel. The first bell of evening prayers, rising through the monastery like incense through a cracked window. You set down your tools, brush crumbs of charcoal off your lap, and shuffle toward the chapel with the rest of the ink-stained faithful. The air is cooler here. The candles are lit, the walls are painted with the faded faces of saints, their eyes wide, their expressions equal parts serene and mildly exasperated. You relate. You find your usual spot near the back, close enough to see the altar, far enough to avoid being asked to read aloud. Your voice is serviceable, but your pronunciation occasionally turns Hosanna into horse cellar, and no one's forgotten that incident from Epiphany 2 years ago. As the abbot begins the evening hymn, your mind drifts. You notice your fingers, still stained with ink, wax, a suspicious fleck of fig paste. You try rubbing them on your sleeve. It doesn't help. You bow with the others, knees creaking like an old door hinge. The candlelight flickers over your tunic, casting long shadows. You murmur the verses, letting the rhythm carry you. Let my prayer rise like incense before you. A phrase repeats in your head, over and over. Did I leave the all in the leather box again? You shake the thought. Try to focus. The lifting up of my hands as the evening sacrifice. Brother Theodorus leans too far forward and lets out a squeaky cough that sounds suspiciously like a squeaky hinge. You suppress a laugh. When prayers end, the monks file out in silence, save for the rustle of sandals and the occasional sniffle. You stay a moment longer, letting your spine settle, and your brain stop buzzing with parchment logistics. You stare up at a fresco of St. Anthony. He seems to be scolding a tree, or blessing it. Hard to tell. The paint has faded and your eyes are tired. Outside, the sky has softened into rose and purple. The courtyard is quieter now. A few monks water the garden. One sits under the fig tree, reading a scroll upside down. You don't correct him. Sometimes upside down is how the soul finds its footing. You return to your bench. There's still a half-inked page waiting, and you hate leaving work mid-line. You settle in, dip your pen, and finish the verse. And then you spot it. A doodle. Small. In the bottom margin, a cow wearing what appears to be bishop's robes. And above it, in the same hand that wrote the text, "May the Lord bless this bovine servant." You close the book, place it gently on the later pile, and mutter, "Amen to that." The shadows grow longer across the courtyard as the sun finally gives up trying to bake the stones into submission. The bells for supper are behind you now, and so is most of the monastery's chatter. You sit alone in the scriptorium, the ambient buzz of the day having faded into the soft crackle of the last candle stub, burning bravely despite its obvious fatigue. You run your finger along the edge of your tunic and examine your hands. Ink stained, nicked, dry. Your fingertips have the permanent texture of soft sandpaper, and your nails are uneven. Not from vanity, but from a particularly aggressive piece of goatskin last week. You sigh. At some point, you probably had hands that looked like they belonged to a scholar. Now they look like they've been repurposed by a tree. But there's still one more task tonight, the last round of shelf inspection in the lower corner of the scriptorium. These aren't the treasured volumes, the gilded psalters and formal liturgical books that get displayed on feast days. No, these are the everyday workhorses, books used so often their spines now resemble worn sandals. Books whose bindings you probably patched half a dozen times already. Familiar. Lovingly abused. A bit like you. You kneel down beside the shelf, the dust puffing into the air like a discouraged ghost. You reach for the top volume, a commentary on Isaiah, and gently test the stitching. Still holds. Then another, a Coptic primer with half its title worn away. You adjust the leather thong, holding it shut. Then move on. That's when you notice it. One of the codices slightly warped, the leather curling at the corner like a stale loaf of bread. You ease it out and open the cover. The inner board is soft, damp, mold. You groan with the depth of someone who has stared too long into the abyss and found mildew instead of meaning. You carry the book to your worktable, unwrap a cloth, and begin the gentle cleaning process. Scraping, blotting, whispering small prayers to Saint Arianus, whom no one has officially declared a patron of mold remediation. But maybe they should. Historians still argue whether monasteries had specific protocols for fungal outbreaks among their manuscripts. Based on your current situation, you're going with probably not. Your personal solution involves cedar oil, intense glaring, and softly swearing into your sleeve. You clean the board, replace the end papers, and rub wax along the spine edges to seal the gap. The text block itself is unharmed, just the cover. Always the part that takes the weather. You rewrap it in cloth and make a mental note to move it to the upper shelves tomorrow, somewhere less drafty, somewhere less cursed. Outside, the night air has cooled, and a breeze slips through the window slits, stirring the candle flame and bringing with it the mingled scents of chamomile, ash, and distant date palms. The rustle of the olive trees sounds almost like whispering. Or perhaps your ears are simply tired. You look around. The scriptorium is nearly empty. A few pages rustle in the far corner, and you see Brother Moses still copying away, hunched like a gargoyle over his scroll. His candle has burned halfway down, but he hasn't moved in over an hour. You wonder, idly, if he's alive or just entered some sort of transcription trance. You decide not to disturb him. Back at your bench, you unwrap a small cloth pouch, your evening ink. It's thicker, sootier, the kind you use for final titles and last lines. You unroll a thin piece of parchment with a quotation half. Finished. Who reads in silence hears the voice of the Lord. You trace over the faded letters with care, adding flourishes to the capitals. The script isn't your best, but it's good, honest. The kind of handwriting that might not impress a bishop, but would comfort a tired monk who just needs to know where to pick up reading again. You finish the line and gently blow across the ink to dry it. You look up. The stars are visible through the high, narrow windows, tiny, unmoving dots in an otherwise restless world. The cat from earlier hops up onto your table again, tail flicking, eyes glowing faintly in the candlelight. It sniffs the fresh ink, makes a face, and settles down on your wax cloth. You sigh. Again. Quirky detail. One famous manuscript found in the desert centuries later had paw prints on 3 pages. Scholars debated for decades whether it was intentional symbolism or just a clumsy feline named Balthazar. You've no doubt it's the latter. Your candle is almost out now. You take one last glance around the scriptorium. The empty benches, the ink-stained rags, the lingering warmth of old prayers. You stretch your arms above your head and feel your back pop like ancient wood. As you clean up your space, you rub the last smudge of ink off your thumb with a lemon scrap from the kitchen. It stings, but you kind of like it. A reminder that you were here, that you made something. That in a small, dusty corner of the world, you took raw parchment, wild thread, stubborn leather, and you built a book. And now, with your fingertips burning slightly and your head beginning to buzz with sleepy static, you head toward your cell, candle stub in hand. The monastery corridor is dim and cool, the kind of quiet that only comes when even the most restless scribes have stopped mumbling and the cats have finally decided their kingdom is safe for slumber. You shuffle toward your cell with the slow, shuffling gait of someone who's stitched a little too tightly all day. Quae res ipsa loquitur. As the Roman monks might say, the thread speaks for itself. Your straw mat awaits you. Rolled up in the corner like a very unenthusiastic pet, you unroll it with one foot and ease yourself down, bones creaking louder than you'd prefer. You're not old, exactly, but your knees have filed a formal complaint and your lower back's begun quoting lamentations in Coptic. Your cell is small. One shelf, one mat, one thin blanket, and a window the size of a loaf of bread. Through it you can see a sliver of the night sky. Stars wink down like patient scribes, watching you with amused silence. You lay flat on your back, staring up at the ceiling, trying not to focus on the way your hip finds the one lumpy rock under the mat every single night. You shift. No luck. Maybe it's divine providence. Maybe it's just the same rock that's been hiding here since Saint Macarius first stubbed his toe on it in the 4th century. There's a faint scratching sound from the corner, probably a mouse or a spider dragging a fig pit, or, once, terrifyingly, a toad that seemed very sure it had been assigned your bed by divine right. You choose not to investigate. You're too tired to renegotiate occupancy tonight. You rub your fingers against your blanket. The fabric is scratchy, but warm. It smells faintly of cedar and ink. You press your hands together, stare at the faint crescent moons of soot and dye on your palms, and marvel again at how a day filled with so much nothing, threading, folding, stamping, dusting, has left your whole body feeling like it copied the Book of Revelation by hand using a spoon. Historians still argue whether monks got used to this feeling or simply transcended it. You're pretty sure the answer is they griped about it quietly until they fell asleep. You roll to one side, finally giving in to the weight in your eyelids, and listen to the monastery's nighttime. Sounds the soft creak of doors shifting in their frames, the distant clatter of a dropped quill in the empty scriptorium, and someone, somewhere, snoring with such force that even the frescoes flinch. As you drift, your mind wanders, not to theology or divine mysteries, but to thread counts. You wonder whether the batch arriving next week will be spun too tight again. You think about Brother Theodorus' smug face. You think about the peacock stamp, mocking you from a dark shelf. And then, as you begin to slip under the waves of sleep, your dream begins like it always does. You are holding a codex. But this one is perfect. Not just survive storage without mold. Perfect. No, this is golden thread, celestial binding. Scribes weep to look upon it. Perfect. The cover gleams like polished jet. The stitching is so tight, you could bounce a coin off the spine. The parchment is smoother than the abbot's forehead after fasting. There are no wormholes, no smudges, no blood spots, no cat hair. And in the dream, you're showing it to a crowd of astonished monks who gasp and murmur and shout, "Who bound this miracle?" And you smile and open your mouth and say, and wake up, still in your cell, still on your lumpy mat, still wearing your ink-streaked tunic because you forgot to change. You chuckle softly to yourself. Not quite a miracle. But hey, today's codex came close. The pages are in the right order. The cover stayed on, and no one used it to swat a bug. That's a win. A sudden itch on your ankle reminds you the fleas are back. Possibly the same family from last spring. You scratch, grumble, and pull the blanket tighter around your shoulders. Outside, the wind rustles the trees again. A fig drops somewhere in the courtyard with a soft plop. A bell chimes once in the far chapel. Probably a breeze, not a monk. Everyone's asleep. Or pretending. You shift again, tuck your arms under the blanket, and let your eyes close. Tomorrow, you'll fold more quires. Thread more needles. Touch up more marginalia. Probably curse at another batch of poorly tanned leather. But tonight you rest. Your knees ache, your back complains, but your heart, just a little, swells with the quiet joy of having built something real with your hands. Something that might last. Centuries pass. Dust thickens. The wooden beams of the monastery groan under desert winds, then storms, then silence. The codex you bound, wrapped in camel leather and humor, sleeps in the cellar. Quiet, forgotten nestled among the other souls of stitched parchment. Until one day, a hand reaches through the dark. It's clumsy at first. Dust swirls as the shelf is disturbed. A low murmur in a language you don't recognize, not Coptic, not even Greek. The accent is sharp, nasal, peppered with words like carbon dating and preservation priority. The hand pulls the codex free, turning it gently under modern light. A flashlight beam glances off the peacock. Still smug, the archaeologist, gloved, squinting, opens the cover and frowns slightly. The pages are stiff, but intact. No major warping. A few wormholes, some ink bleed, and there, on page 3, a faint blotch of what their report will describe as possibly organic fluid. Origin uncertain. You smile from the shadows. It's your blood, of course. A reminder of that all prick. And the fly that wouldn't leave you alone. The codex is lifted into the sun for the first time in 1,000 years. A breeze brushes over the leather. It smells of dust, dried sweat, and maybe, just faintly, figs. Historians gather around it. A woman peers at the stitching. Curious, she says, running a tool along the cords. Not symmetrical. Almost playful. She doesn't know that's because you sneezed while threading. Twice, they turn to the marginalia. One scholar gasps at the doodle of the cartwheeling saint. Another laughs at the cow in bishop's robes. They argue over symbolism, ritual significance, artistic intent. No one guesses the cow was drawn out of boredom during a thunderstorm. They scan the spine, marveling at the age of the binding. One student gently traces the borderlines. You can feel the pressure of the hand. He murmurs. They note the oddities. A slight ripple on page 6. The inconsistency in leather dye. The barely visible thread knot that looks like a heart. They photograph everything. They place the codex in a plastic sleeve. They give it a number, a shelf, a climate, controlled vault. And in some lab report, someone writes, unidentified scribe, competent binding, minor inconsistencies, likely produced in Upper Egypt circa 9th century, intended for storage, not display. You feel a quiet pride stir somewhere in that parchment. Not bad for something you patched with wax, swore at repeatedly, and nearly ruined with a fig. A few years later, the codex appears in a museum. Low lighting, soft glass, and a plaque that simply says, Sayings of Abba Isidore, bound by unknown monk, 800s CE. Visitors stop and stare. They see the peacock, the cross, the slightly askew corner. They never see your cramped fingers, or your scratched ankles, or the lunch you ate under the fig tree while Brother Pachomius ranted about lizards. But maybe, just maybe, one visitor leans in and smiles at the crooked spine and the doodles. Maybe they feel a strange warmth behind their ribs and think, whoever made this, they were real. And they're right. You were. The museum lights dim at closing time. The glass cases lock with a soft click. The hum of air circulation settles into a steady lull, like distant ocean waves. The codex sits still and whole, its camel leather aged into soft folds, its stitching relaxed into silence. Outside, the night grows long and gentle. Somewhere, under starlight, a palm tree sways, just faintly, like it did all those centuries ago. You, back in your little cell, dream gently now. You dream of bone folders, of thread running smooth through parchment, of pages folded in time, of stories inked into breath, the rough smell of hide, the flick of candlelight across a saint's painted eye, the comfort of routine, the holiness of boredom. In your dream, there is no mold, no misplaced awl, no ink stains on your elbow. Just the rhythmic piece of thread through parchment, of hands at work under whispering prayers. You turn the pages of a perfect book and find your name stitched into the margin. Not boldly, but shyly, as if even eternity felt it best to be subtle. The wind outside hushes. The stars blink slowly. The cat on your table shifts in its sleep. And far, far away, in a glass box under soft light, your codex waits patiently for someone else to find comfort in quiet things. Good night, scribe. Sleep well.